Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, first, Nick sends his regards. He wanted to come on this one, but his boss said, no, you got to qualify on the range today, and free ammo is just something most people can't afford to turn their nose up at. So that is where he is. He's shooting holes into things. And with that, we're going to let our guests introduce themselves for this outstanding topic. First, we have Mr. Dan Kemp.
Wow, way to drop to the bottom of the page and throw me in. All right. Author of the Athenaeum Incorporated military thriller novels, author of let's see, Dragons in Combat, The Big Ones, Tales of an Alternate World War II. I have bounced bars. I have fought Iraqis in building hallways. I've fought other drunks. I've been doing this stuff for way too long.
All right.
Oh, Frankie, standing next, we have the one, the only, the legendary Doc Spears himself.
Woo! Yo. John Spears, Doc Spears, U.S. Army Special Forces vet, recovering orthopedic surgeon, current contractor for Department of Defense, trained snipers and assaulters for the U.S. Army, write for Wargate and Galaxy's Edge, author of the Dark Operators series and the Warlords series, and a couple other odd titles here and there. It's great to see everybody.
Your books helped me realize how crappy sometimes reviews can be, because when you wrote your first novel, the number one review was, this guy knows nothing about Spec Ops. Why'd they let him write the book?
Yeah, one of my favorites.
Like a quick Google search would have told them everything they needed to know, but they armchair warriors, man.
Yeah, it's fun. That's how I never read the reviews.
Yeah, but that one just had me. I almost would have framed that one and used that as ironic ad copy if Amazon's terms of service would let you, because that was just too beautiful.
Well, it's also not to delay introductions, but people should know that most of the social media, which is what Amazon reviews is, social media, a tremendous part of it is enemy disinformation by other authors or the agents for other authors, which is actually true, which is why, everybody who gets on to complain because there's not a certain narrator on a book, and how much better it would be if it was only this particular narrator is a paid provocateur by that narrator, so
I wish I got that kind of attention.
So what I can tell you is one way to cure that, dear listener, if you're that picky about your audiobooks, if you just get blown up 37 plus times and end up with a case of freedom ringing in your ears all the time, you don't care because you can't hear most of it anyway. So you win.
Facts.
All right. Next, we have Mr. Jesse James Fain, outlaw author extraordinaire.
Hey, everybody. I am Jesse James Fain, and I have nowhere near that level of impressive combat resume. But I did get to spend about 15 years training very heavily in a ton of various styles. Muay Thai Jiu-Jitsu, traditional wrestling, traditional Jiu-Jitsu, a huge list that I'm not going to go into. And I did get some experience as a unofficial bouncer, and lots of fun, just stupid scraps of stupid stuff that happens when you're in the wrong place and too many people have alcohol.
I mean, in my misspent youth, I got into fights with bouncers. Does that count?
I mean, in my opinion, compared to everyone else, if you know what it's like to really get punched in the face, you're doing better than most.
What's that famous Mike Tyson quote? Everyone's got a plan until someone punches them in the face.
Yeah. Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
His other one was after that kid attacked him on the airplane, something about people got too comfortable getting lippy behind the keyboard, something to that effect.
Yeah.
I don't know. My favorite one is when he's talking to that 12-year-old and he just goes off into this whole existential crisis about we're all going to die one day and there's not going to be a legacy left over. That's got to be one of my favorite Mike Tyson interviews and quotes of all time.
I missed that one, and now I will Google it when this podcast ends.
I'm gonna throw it up there on my Twitter.
Figure standing. Well, I follow you on Twitter, so we're good. All right. Speaking of following you on Twitter, we have Mr. Reginald Lewis himself.
Hey.
Fisticuffs.
How's everyone doing? Reginald Lewis, author of the Guardian Saga. Let's see. I'm currently in 19 years in the Air Force, mechanic, federal agent, deployed 4 times. I've done jiu-jitsu, 15-ish years in boxing, competitive boxing, and done a little bit of Muay Thai.
So I know you got your son into boxing. So you and your prime, your kid, could he take you?
Oh, absolutely not. He could not.
Yeah. So he's got some room to grow still.
The kids these days are soft. No matter how much, no matter how tough I try to raise them, he won't ever be as combat ready as me.
One of the things they taught us when you wrestled is a lot of these kids, because I wrestled in middle school and high school, they've been wrestling since they were like 4 or 5, and I came in it late to the game for that sport. And one of the things the coach said is if you can take the pain and just wait for them to mess up, it doesn't matter how many perfect moves they can do. You only got to get it right once. and that was always my secret sauce. I was too stubborn to quit.
That's true.
And that works in boxing, I think, especially.
Ooh, yeah, but in boxing, if you get hit that one, if you just get hit like right here in that one spot, it's lights out. You could take, but you get hit in that one spot, and it doesn't matter. It's just lights out. So
for you, what's your boxing love starting with the Mike Tyson punch out? I would have been like the glass jaw guy that goes down in the first boxing match. My boxing started when I think I got to a lot of fights in school, like a lot. So my friend, he at the time, I grew up in Stockton, California. Okay. So at the time, my friend, shout out to AJ, he took me to a gym, and it happened to be the gym where the Diaz brothers trained. So one of my 3 regrets in my life is Nick Diaz would teach jiu-jitsu for free. And I looked at it and I was like, I'm not going to learn that. That looks like gay wrestling. So I decided to take boxing instead. And lo and behold, look at jiu-jitsu now. And if I would have started back then, I could have been like a super duper black belt. You could have been a contender. I could have been. So Doc, I happen to know that when you went into the Army, they were still teaching the Army chop as the basic hand-to-hand combat. Were you pleasantly surprised when you went to the more special, super secret stuff that you got to do cooler martial arts?
There's never been like a doctrinal like military school martial arts. Every time, in any of the service where they've started, it's been a fairly short-lived thing. I think the Marines probably had the longest living program going, based around mixed martial arts. I think it's still going, but like even at my time, it's like anything. Just because you go to like military free fall school doesn't make you a sky god. The dudes who are sky gods are out there, they're sport jumping up on the weekends. The dudes who have, a lot of facility with martial arts are dudes who that's what they do, full time. When you're out of the team room and you're not on a mission, you're in the gym training with your buddies. And I would say that, I had a martial arts background in Kung Fu in high school. And then once I finally got into the Army, and then especially in Special Forces, you're just in with a group of dudes who, we had dudes who were, Eskrima, Silat guys who were Tang Sudo, Hwarang Do guys. We had, dudes. And when you're in a mix with dudes like that, and like you go down range for like 6 months together at a time, on a team, there's like nothing else to do but train when you're not working, so, and after like 7 years of that and having a really good exposure to a wide range of Asian martial arts, then I dedicated myself to the traditional Asian martial arts, judo, jujutsu, went to Japan, trained in the Kanagawa prefectural dojo, got my rank recognized by the Kokusai Budo-in, which is the, recognized by the Japanese royal family in the emperor as the, qualifying record for traditional Japanese martial arts. And, I was really lucky. I had a very wide martial arts exposure and career. But like the idea is like you go into like SF, or you go to like 75th, you do something, and like hand to hand is like a real big part of like your training and stuff like that. It's just absolutely not true. I mean, in the military, even in special operations, it's about weapon systems.
Okay.
Hand to hand and martial arts are, it's continually, it's a great outlet. It's a great form of self-development and physical training, but mainly its purpose is to build aggression and to understand how to apply aggression in whatever discipline you use. But, it's not that it doesn't come in handy, especially in low vis urban operations and things like that. And there are the occasional times where you can't carry a firearm, and certainly they're great skills to have, but there's a time penalty of all the things you could be training on, that will make you a better operator. Why would you waste training time during the day, to like do 2 or 3 hours of martial arts? That's what you should be doing in your non-duty time. Do you dig?
I'm picking up what you're putting down. I just remember when they taught us the Army chop at boot camp in '98, the drill instructor firmly told us that he taught us just enough to have the confidence to get our ass kicked in a bar.
Yep.
But I did take 3 free lessons with Chuck Norris Studios in the '80s. So that basically makes me a god, right?
Rex Kwando, right?
Nobody wants to get red ass kicked in the face with these babies on.
Break the wrist.
All right. So because this is the Blasters and Blades, we do have to ask the religion question, but obviously we're here to talk about hand-to-hand combat in fiction. So we are going to target our questions accordingly. So we're going to start with The Matrix, Mortal Kombat, or The One, which is the Jet Li film, if you don't know. Reggie.
I'm going to go with The Matrix. It's just a cultural, it just set the bar. After The Matrix, it just changed everything. So I'm going to have to go with The Matrix. Number 1, number 2, and number 3 are terrible. Number 1, the first one.
Okay. Jesse?
I'm going to go with The One. It has a really awesome depiction of Bagozang, Kung Fu. And the circle walking scene where Jet Li's like self-training for focus is really awesome. That's almost pinpoint on what I had the honor of being able to learn. And some of the lines and stuff in it are just absolutely hilarious. It was a quintessential 2000s movie. It had Disturbed on the soundtrack. It was, I'm about it.
Okay. And they did predict the future. They said American culture peaked in 2020 or 2000, and I think maybe they were onto something because look what the 2020 brought us. I'm just saying, maybe the director knew something we didn't. His Magic 8 Ball was better than ours. So, Dan.
Matrix.
Yeah.
Okay. John, go ahead, Dan.
You can't argue with Matrix. It's got a variety of styles. It's got integration of pistols and knives in close combat in addition to your hand-to-hand combat styles. It's a far more realistic and useful depiction.
Realistic in The Matrix, I never thought I'd see hand and stand a fist, but I'll take it. All right, Sean.
Compared to Mortal Kombat?
True. But I played Mortal Kombat in the arcades as a kid, so I'm just,
Same.
I have to throw in with The Matrix, though, in principle, I despise all wire foo with, dudes flying around doing stuff like that. But The Matrix, it makes sense because it's like happening in a virtual reality, right? So everything is permitted. Anything else, if there's wire foo involved, I like watch something else. like watch a Seinfeld rerun or something like that.
A man of discerning tastes, I see. I do like the Matrix where you can just like plug a chip in and suddenly you're an expert on the thing. Yeah. I wish real life worked that way, although if everyone's an expert, then really nobody is. So I don't know, maybe not. But because I grew up, I used to walk 1.5 miles to the arcade near my parents' house growing up as a kid to play Mortal Kombat with my buddies. So I'm going for the movie because it's got the nostalgia vibe for me. I spent many a quarter on that game.
You talking about the early 2000s one or the one that came out like 5 years ago?
For the movie, I was just picking because both came up under the search for ones with hand-to-hand. So dealer's choice, I'm just saying. But I liked both of them, but mostly because it's the nostalgia thing for me. So your mileage may vary. And because we are polytheistic, Warcraft, King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, that's the one Guy Ritchie directed, or The Last Airbender. Reggie?
It's a tough one. I'm going to say Warcraft. Yeah, okay. Just Warcraft. That's it. I'm just say Warcraft.
Fair. Jesse?
I'm going to do Legend of the Sword. It's the one that stands out the most in my mind for the scene that involved like actual fisticuffs, which I'm a big Guy Ritchie fan. The majority of the time, I think his humor is really awesome, and when he does action, it's very like dramatic and very entertaining. And so yeah, that's my pick.
That's a good pick. All right, Dan.
Agreed. Guy Ritchie does violence very well. So I'm going to go with the King Arthur on this one.
John. No wires involved in these three.
True that. I got to say, I loves me some Guy Ritchie. The guy, he is very awesome, but I liked Warcraft. Warcraft had it going on for me.
Me too. I wish they did a sequel. I know the people that played the game absolutely like savaged that movie, but having no experience with the MMORPG going into it, it was just a movie. I really dug it. So
I did too. Right on. That was phenomenal.
All right, and so are there any movies that you guys think actually that I didn't find on our list because we were scrambling in the pre-show to find options for these choices? Are there any movies that stand out to you as having the best hand-to-hand fighting scenes?
Oh, The Raid, easily. The Raid, 1 and 2.
Oh. I don't think I've seen that one. I'm going to add that to
awesome.
The Raid. Okay, listen. The Raid walked so John Wick and Mr. Nobody can run. Yep. If it wasn't for The Raid, we would not have any John Wick movies. We wouldn't have Mr. Nobody. We wouldn't have a lot of these movies.
Well, isn't that Indonesian?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was both movies were awesome.
Yes. Yeah.
Excellent pick.
Yeah, and then the director, he does other movies too, and he can just direct action. In my opinion, he's just the best. Gareth Evans, I think that's what his name is.
I liked. Have you guys seen the Tollywood movie, The 3 Rs? No. It is Bollywood Indian film shenanigans. It's not wire fu, but I guess it's their version of it. But it is so over the top, and it's just these two heavily muscled dudes that it's like the Jim Bro love affair going on with these two buddies as they like beat up the world. So I'm digging it.
Oh, what's it called? You have to throw that up on Twitter because
it's The 3 Rs. We actually did a movie review of it. I'll dig it out. It was in season 4, season 4. It is epic. I mean, it's like two Jim Bros become best friends and then beat the crap out of the world. That is the description in a nutshell. And it's all. I mean, they use guns too, but like they're doing some hand-to-hand stuff. He even punches a horse in one scene, which I mean, come on.
Conan punched a camel.
Did he? Oh, that's right.
Yep. And Mongo punched out a horse.
John, you got some recommendations you want to throw in there?
Extraction.
Oh, that's a good one.
Good one.
Chris Hemsworth. Guy named Chili Palmer did the stunt coordination and the fight choreography. He was a CAG guy, so he did a long career with Delta, and then he worked with Kyle Lamb for Viking Tactics for a while, and he's just an awesome guy, and that he found that role as a fight choreographer was just wonderfully natural, and the stuff that's in that movie, and it's like everything, theatrical, it's got to be drawn out to create to create drama, and it's got to be very visually engaging and things like that. But as far as like being inventive and, about as realistic or believable rather as you could get, you could definitely suspend disbelief. It was done so well in that movie. So I recommend that one highly.
Okay. So do you guys have a favorite fighting style to see in film, no matter, or in print, no matter how impractical it might be?
So for me, a big thing is the big guy in a bunch of martial arts and hand-to-hand movies. The big guy is always very slow and stiff, and there are like these huge, powerful, stiff motions, but there's no fluidity or there's no on your toes movement. There's no snap when the punches come out. But in Extraction, I love Extraction and that mixed style because Tyler Rake, Chris Hemsworth's character, he fights the way big dudes that actually fight. He hits these big, huge double legs. He's grabbing stuff and smashing people with it. He's hitting these big, powerful, to blow the family rating, FU maneuvers, which FU maneuvers are big, powerful, transversal maneuvers like double leg takedowns and foot sweeps, and things where you rip and slam, and then you can just walk away if you want to, but normally you take that moment to cause damage. So I love seeing when that's done well, when you have a physically imposing and powerful guy that is using all that power in a trained fashion.
Okay.
My weakness is good realism and of skillful use of improvised weapons. Let's go back to the doctrinal underpinnings of like Rex Applegate, for example. He preached even to the OSS candidates back in 42 that unarmed combat exists to tide you over until you can get a weapon. It may be a chair, it may be a bottle, it may be some other improvised item laying around. The human hand, and our orthopedic surgeon here will back me up on this, is a very fragile instrument with a lot of little bones and shit in it.
Yep.
I've never broken a finger to my knowledge, but I've sprained them and bent them and bruised them. And it's a miracle that I don't have gnarled up arthritis like my mother does, because I have gotten the shit smashed out of my hands before, in work contexts, not just in combatant sort. So use something other than your hands. There is always something around harder than your knuckles. Use it.
My head.
Yeah, if you want to collect a couple of concussions, bro, that's on you. Me, I got glasses. I'm not headbutting somebody because I usually have glasses in the way. Then I need a seeing eye dog.
Yeah, Dan is so right on, and what a great reference. Fairbairn and Applegate and those dudes who had all of that real world, cop experience. Fairbairn, like with the Shanghai Police in the 30s and stuff. Mm-hmm. Those guys were the absolute, masters of what effective hand-to-hand was. But yeah, it's a big, I've gotten boxer fractures, 4th, 5th metacarpal, where, as a younger guy, it just, you can beat the makiwara all day, you can break cinder blocks, you can do everything. And, right into it where you say, like, I've got the perfect shot lined up, man, and I'm just going to lay this one, put a little torque on it, right under that guy's cheekbone. I'm going to turn his head, knock him out, and he dips his head so that instead of catching it on the, 2nd and 3rd knuckles, you catch it on the 4th and 5th knuckles, and you break your hand. Doesn't matter how well conditioned you are. So it's like, yep, that's big. Knowing it, but having to eventually be forced to put it into application. Use something soft against something hard. Use something hard against something soft.
I'm picking up what you're putting down. I'm digging it. So obviously it's not always practical, and why bring a fist when you can bring a gun? But in fiction, sometimes the impractical is more fun, right? So it's nice to see the jerk get punched in the face because he had it coming, or that moment of righteous rage when you get your justice meted out one punch at a time.
Go for the throat. There's no bones down here.
Just cartilage, and it crushes.
Exactly.
That is taking notes. All right. Don't try this at home, people. Don't sue us. Insert legal disclaimer here. So when you guys see combat either portrayed on the screen or on print, do you prefer it to be like spelled out move for move, or do you like more just the vibe for it?
I will Dick Marcinko and like completely throw teaching points into the fight scene and explain shit as I go, because I never know if I've got some 18 or 19-year-old PFC reading my drivel, and I don't want to install bad habits into the next generation. I was well tutored when I was a young man, and I feel I have to pay that forward.
I
miss Dick. He was a nice guy to me the one time I met him.
I like a good mixture. And it's really hard because you can have a balance between if you're overly detailed, I think you might lose people that aren't like fight fans. But if you're too vague, then it might be a little bit hard to envision it. So you got to have like some really good detail. One of the best fight scenes I read was I don't know if you guys read the Sun Eater series. So I think it was book 4, where he was Christopher. I can't say his last name, but it was book 4 where he was fighting on this the spaceship, and it was like the perfect blend of like kind of technique where it shows he's like, I think he's like twisting his hips, and then it's also like very like vague where it's like he twists his hips and then it was like an impact and he flew across the the bay. So
it wasn't Christopher Ruccio, was it?
Yeah, Christopher Ruccio.
I was at MarsCon in Virginia Beach with him a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, he did great. He did great with that. I forget what book. I think it was book 3 or 4. I don't remember which one it was. It was great though.
Hold that thought.
So
to get back here.
Go ahead, Jesse.
Well, adding, I don't know who's up. Jesse, do it.
Oh, I was going to say, there's been a video that's been going around of a really popular author, and he's not wrong. If you don't know how to do it, then you don't know how to do it. But it's blow by blow is boring. And if your blow by blow is boring, then you failed the basic tenets of a story.
That was a Brandon Sanderson YouTube video.
Yeah, I wouldn't go that far, but okay. You've failed your pacing. You've failed to understand where the audience is at in your story. If you can understand those things, the blow by blows can get really entertaining because they teach you how your guy was trained, how he moved, how the opponents feel about each other. If you're throwing kicks to the head, you probably don't respect your opponent. Now, I understand people that aren't as well versed in combat might not understand that, but they should probably understand the risk of like what throwing a head kick means. Mm-hmm. And so you can craft so much of the story into everything from how these guys are built, from how they feel about one another, to there's so many details that you can craft into that. So I like seeing a mix of both, as has already been said. But I feel like having at least some detail into what's happening and the way that they move, the way that they strike, the way that they do all these different things is really important to developing a good action character.
Mm-hmm. Very.
You were going to say, John, before...
I think that we're very fortunate that that in the science fiction realm that you could add so many other elements into those kind of confrontations, like the characters being in micro G, which totally changes the dynamics of otherwise what you would be doing under gravity and all of that makes it more fun to write. I find that most of the time that it's actually kind of a chore and not necessarily an enjoyable one, writing fight scenes or battle scenes or things like that. And it's only when you can add those other fantastic elements in that change some of just even the basic physics of what people are doing that I can get a little charged up about writing.
Doc, that jogged a memory. There was a really good zero-G fight scene in a BattleTech novel that I read when I was in high school. And a guy ends up fighting a clan elemental who's this genetically engineered infantry guy, like 3 times his size, fought him in zero-G and cheated that way.
That's cool.
Yeah.
You ain't cheating, you ain't trying.
Nope. And if you get caught, you weren't trying hard enough.
Absolutely.
I remember, who writes the Drizzt novels, the Dark Elf?
Oh, R.A. Salvador.
Oh, yeah.
So way back when he wrote this, it was like a 30-page fight scene. It was the longest fight scene I've ever read. And I don't know how, but maybe it might have been because I was younger, but I was hooked the whole way through. So it could have been because I was younger too.
I've heard, I mentioned it on the show before too, but one of the things I like to apply when I read action scenes to include fight scenes is what I call the Barbie test. And most of the time that means the figures, can they bend the way they show them? I've read plenty of fight scenes where the only way that the fight scene is physically possible, if they dislocate and disconnect their leg, then they wrap around, do the thing, and then they reconnect their leg because the body just doesn't bend that way. You can't motivate an action figure to move in that way. Generally speaking, unless you've got some sort of weird magical reason, it just doesn't work.
But the bending of the human body, as the jiu-jitsu guys like to say, the art of folding clothes while people are still in them. You can exploit the flexibility or lack of flexibility of the human body in terms of writing your fight scene. You exploit okay, his arm would bend 90 degrees, but not the way I bent it. A little shit like that gives you opportunities as both a writer and a reader.
Mm-hmm.
The elbow's a one-way hinge.
Yep.
Yeah, but when you read the ones that get it wrong, when they're talking about the way the body's moving, it just stands out. You try to picture it in your head, and suddenly you realize that they had to have been able to just take their leg off and then do the thing.
You can always read a fight scene by somebody who's never gotten in that many fights.
It's the same with gun scenes of people who've never fired one. It shows. Although
that's a whole other show, man.
Oh, absolutely, we should pencil that one in as well.
We should do that.
In the age of YouTube, though, there's just no excuses. You can find a video out there of just about anything you want, dang near, to see how things are done.
Yep.
Martial
art or weapon. You can find a video on YouTube. I guarantee it.
Yes, plenty of street fighting videos.
It's all about the audience, is what it is. If you're a person who is very well known in your properties for creating situations that have some realism to it, then you've got to go with what you do, right? But
you have to.
There are tons of very famous, very successful authors, especially in the crime genre and things like that, who know nothing about going hands-on with somebody, know nothing about firearms. It's clear in their writing. They couldn't even be bothered to do a minor amount of research or ask somebody, does this seem reasonable? I mean, down to the point of basic nomenclature. But they have their audience, and it's an audience that doesn't care about any aspect of that. And it doesn't, derail their primary audience off of enjoying what the story is. So, hey, more power to them.
I've got dozens of fans who are heavily into the realism thing because, I was asked as a marketing exercise to describe my ideal reader. And I said, 35 to 55, GWAT vet, combat experience, porn collection, owns a minimum of a dozen personal firearms. And they looked at me and said, that's oddly specific. And I said, but I know my readers because I actually knew most of these guys before I started writing. So I don't have the luxury of making stuff up because they'll crucify me. That's the kind of crap I have to write. I have to be obsessively detailed.
And that's one of the things you realize that when you talked about with that knowing your audience is each era in the military is going to have its own sort of subculture. So I imagine each era when it comes to when people discover sci-fi and fantasy with what they expect is going to be different.
Yes.
Like somebody who grew up reading Sanderson's, billion-word books might expect something different than someone who's reading the indie stuff now where, it's 100,000. And so that does affect the audience expectations when it comes to what they look for in everything.
Or somebody who grew up on Highline, for that matter.
Yeah. Although a lot of his stuff was more political treaties disguised as books than they were true, what I would consider fiction. I love them, but I mean, they were almost more academic with the way he got deep on the philosophy. So,
social fiction is how most of his books ended up being pigeonholed.
Yeah.
Glory Road has a couple of excellent fight scenes in it, particularly the sword stuff.
Yeah.
Yep. The old man basically invented what we think of as that modern, swords and sorcery kind of genre. Mm-hmm. Oh no, hats off to nobody hit it like that dude.
If I really want to get views, we can talk about controversial things like horses, guns, or swords. Because you want to get sword people going, tell them about the sheath that you wear behind your back that you can draw, and watch the shenanigans just go. Or call the groove in the blade a blood groove, and your comment section will light up.
Sword.
It's a fuller.
See what I mean?
Sword people. Okay, and I say this owning at least half a dozen swords. Sword people make gun people look normal. They really do.
I mean, to be fair, no one walks around with swords anymore.
I'll probably get hate clicks off of that. But gun people are weird, but sword people are like another whole level of weird out past.
So what I'm hearing, Reggie, is make dueling great again. And then throw your sword around. When you got to put your money where your mouth is, people will generally be nicer to each other.
I agree with that 100%.
And with that, we're going to pause for a moment while we shamelessly shill for the man, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk more about hand-to-hand combat in fiction.
There is a thin wall between our world and that of the Fae. The passions and emotions stirred by violence and combat bleed over, and the supernatural often awakes from long slumber to meddle in mortal affairs. There have always been those among us willing to meet the supernatural threat. They are the men and women of Joint Task Force 13. They hold the line between heaven and hell. JTF 13 from Three Ravens Publishing. Available on Amazon.
All right. Thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude. So before we went to commercial, we were talking about general things that trigger various fandoms. So are there anything when you're talking about hand-to-hand combat in fiction that will trigger the masses?
Hang on, buddy.
So like, you put a safety on a weapon that doesn't have one, people go nuts. Is there an equivalent to that kind of thing in hand-to-hand combat when it comes to fiction?
Oh, God.
Yes, when people don't get tired when they're fighting. So you will have, I understand you have to kind of like, it's a story, but like when you have people that are fighting and they just fight for like what seems to be like an hour and there's like no breaks, that just kind of gets me like, you have to put like some sort of rest in there where they can at least, they need to take a step back or they need to find a way to catch their breath and recover. But just going straight at it for who knows how long, that kind of triggers me a bit. Yeah.
And anybody who's done any kind of like wrestling, there's a reason that the rounds are 3 minutes each, and they're only 3 of them if you last through the 9 minutes. And most of them are over in the first.
A 9-minute wrestling match is the equivalent of playing an entire football game. Having done many of both. I mean, it's just for real. Like 6 seconds at a time doing plays is a totally different beast to having to fight somebody with your whole body for 3 minutes straight.
Yep.
I think the big one for me is the amount of damage that people can like take and absorb in some of these movies, like in the hand-to-hand movies, which there's so many bad hand-to-hand things that like you have to learn to tune it out. It's like being a gun guy and watching a movie. You've got to learn to tune it out, or it will ruin every movie you ever watch.
Yeah, the wild haymakers.
Yeah.
So you're telling me the John Wayne classics are not proper fighting form?
They're better than Rocky. I'll put it that way.
Oh,
Maybe that'll be my controversial rant. Was Rocky is one of the most famous boxing movies of all time, and the boxing in it is god awful.
It's terrible.
It took them 4 friggin' movies to get a real boxer. Like,
So terrible.
and even then it didn't get better. But like the example that movie's built off of was a one-time fight, and that dude literally walked out with his entire face looking like it had been put through a mallet and a cheese grater. Like it was. So that's probably the most egregious example when I talk about the damage factor. Is Rocky ate 800 haymakers and stayed on his feet.
No defense. Defense didn't exist in that movie.
He had the power of plot armor, I guess. So when it comes to the fighting, like one of the things that action movies love is the training montage. Do you think those are as common when it comes to the hand-to-hand combat scenes, or do those kind of relegated more to the weapon stuff?
I think the training montages are mostly hand-to-hand stuff. That's where I remember them as. I'm trying to think of a movie where there was a training montage for guns.
I think John Wick had one, didn't they?
I thought he just knew everything already.
He was a veteran. He knew everything already.
Yeah.
I was thinking of Wanted with Angelina Jolie and what's his name, who played Professor
James
X.
McAvoy.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
He did have. There was a training scene in that one.
Yeah, there were a bunch of them.
Several.
Yeah.
A quarter of the movie is him learning to be the supervillain he's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
I just think of Rocky, and Creed.
Yeah, I think Hand to Hand has a lot of training montages, and I think it's a rite of passage that's brought over from the Karate Kid and sports movies.
Yeah.
That you see a lot of. You see a lot of that. There was one in Never Back Down. There's the classic Karate Kid example. I think that it's one of those things that people just feel like it's necessary to maybe establish why your character is able to do the things they can do.
Yeah. It takes away the whole Gary Stu type of thing.
okay. Now when
The 36 Chambers of Shaolin. Yes, I'm sorry. I was looking away. I had to look it up. Yes.
Wu-Tang!
That's the stepwise, like hand-to-hand training is the 36 Chambers of Shaolin. The back when Kung Fu movies were worth watching.
Yep.
Yeah,
It's a
every
great
Kung Fu movie back then had a lot of training montages. Bruce Lee.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, all the really like the early like classic, Jackie Chan movies and Gordon Liu movies and stuff like that. It's always about taking the dude who's been wronged, and then he like has to train up from apprenticeship to mastership. Then he gets revenge. Isn't that like the theme of like every classic kung fu movie?
It is.
That came out of Shaw Brothers. Back before the wire fu. Back when Johnny used to love kung fu.
So that was in the era of like the Jean-Claude Van Damme and the what is the one that does the slow motion stuff? That's really fat and he moved to Russia. Oh, who's that?
Steven Seagal.
Steven Seagal. That was his era. Is that even a real martial art that he does, or is that just like Hollywood
Yeah,
stuff?
no,
Aikido is real.
completely legit in Aikido for a long time.
I actually know several people who when I trained in Japan, he'd been there many decades before, of course, but I knew several dudes who knew him when he came to Japan, in the 60s and stuff like that, who none of them had glowing things to say about him. And my whole purpose wasn't to jump onto like bashing, Steven Seagal, other than he's a complete dirtbag. But that does bring up like a really interesting, like the soft internal style martial art versus like the hard external style martial art, of which, you could say like, if you're familiar with like Bagua and Xingyi, and of course Tai Chi and things like that is like Chinese internal circular soft martial arts versus like the really hard external stuff. Aiki is kind of like its own kind of wacky cult. You know, I studied Aiki for like 5-6 years and somehow, you know, recovered from that. And, you know, it's like a really interesting way of like training. It's like a really interesting way of learning principles and biomechanics in a different way than you do in judo and stuff like that. But to see that like what Steven Seagal has to do with it to make it look like a viable combat martial art is pretty hilarious.
Well, so
and
that
it
that
has
also
been from the get-go.
that also got me thinking, because I'm referencing him as overweight and going to Russia because I was trying to jog people's memory because I couldn't remember his name.
You did it.
I am not in any way like shaming. All of us will get older, and so it's not a. But that did make me think. One of the things that I've noticed I like in just action movies in general is a lot of times you've got the older wise guy or more experienced fighter, and everyone thinks, oh, he's too old, he's going to get his butt kicked. But because he's smarter, he still is stacking bodies metaphorically. I like seeing that because it's always fun to see the guy underestimated come out on top.
Yeah, like what's it, Pai Mei in Kill Bill? I think that's what his name
Yep.
is. Yeah, he taught the 5-finger death touch. I love those movies. But
Yeah, that was
that's
Gordon
good.
Liu. Yeah, that was Gordon Liu.
Yeah, I'll be back in 30 seconds. I got to get the dog. He's going nuts.
Hey, John, you were talking about Tai Chi, and that it reminded me of that movie with Keanu Reeves. It was Tai Chi Man.
Man of Tai Chi.
Yeah,
Tai
and
Chi was awesome.
Yes, because his whole style was Tai Chi, and the whole point of the movie wasn't it? It was either to see if Tai Chi actually worked, or it was to corrupt him to make Tai Chi like kill somebody or something like that. But it was a whole soft versus hard martial arts theme that was going on in that movie.
Yeah, which is an interesting exploration. It's interesting. Like Tai Chi is like, I studied Southern long form Kung Fu for a long time. And within that, my teacher, taught us like the short and the long form of a very yin Tai Chi style. But I had a buddy I served with in SF who, became the private student of a Tai Chi master who taught a very Yang style, hard Tai Chi, who I hadn't seen this dude in about a year or so like that. And, knew he was like in Tai Chi, and I was really heavy in judo, and I was, through Bragg for a visit and checking him out. And I like fictionalized his character into at least a couple of my books because after like a year of studying this Yang style Tai Chi, his warm up was he would take a carpet and duct tape it around a telephone pole and line up in a horse stance and strike the telephone pole with his radius and his ulna on both sides until he could get the top of the telephone pole to move. And he's like, you should really come check us out, man, and start training with us. So like, man, if I didn't have another gig going, that was enough right there. It's like, I'll drop what I'm doing and move back to Bragg and like do that,
Wow.
And so, even within like supposedly like soft internal styles, there's a really big spectrum of like what those dudes do, at least in the Chinese martial arts. In the Japanese arts, I could say as far as like Aiki and stuff like that goes, man, I wish I had those years back of my training life.
So the Koreans do some interesting stuff in between that, though, with Hapkido as opposed to Aikido.
Okay.
But
yeah, Hapkidos are really interesting. I studied with the Hapkido guys for several years, and very much a very complete art as far as like the best like kicking systems from like Tang Soo Do and striking and stuff like that, but really good grappling, joint locks like jujutsu and stuff like that. So yeah, the Hapkido dudes the Warong Do dudes, you know, there's nothing to turn your nose up about that. If you studied one of those systems and really dedicated yourself to it, you'd have a very well-rounded, you know, toolbox to draw from.
When I was stationed in Korea, we had the Yongsan Wrestling Club, which was ex-college guys, ex-high school guys. But the Rock Marine Corps wrestling team used to come over about once every other week and mop the floor with us.
Wow.
Well, they were friendly about it. They were just sick of rolling with each other, so they were looking to cross-pollinate styles with, like, you know, American folk style and, you know, American collegiate, which was great. But a bunch of those guys were also into Hapkido and Hwarang and some of the other stuff. So, you know, before and after Wrestling Club, you could pick up some other stuff. Then the company I was in had we didn't have Catusas. We had honest to God rock regulars. And
because you'd have learned nothing from Catusas.
Exactly. But 8th Army Honor Guard.
I cannot lift that. It's too heavy, Sergeant.
8th Army Honor Guard Company, we had platoons of rock regulars from each of their services, and they're rock Marines were their pretty boys, but, you know, still some of them were willing to play occasionally. Then we had a contingent from Thailand, and the contingent from Thailand was all Rock Army SF guys, black berets, cat's heads, badges, the rest. And well, our CO at the time, Tommy Golder, he retired as deputy commander of the Ranger Regiment, so he did okay for himself. But he was very big. This was 99. He was very into Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And he made the mistake of talking shit to a couple of the Thais about how great Gracie Jiu-Jitsu was.
Oh, no.
This ended up in the sand volleyball pit in front of the company. They chased everybody out of the yard, but we're hanging out of the upstairs windows to watch. It went slow. Then it sped up, and people were hitting harder and harder, and people started getting annoyed, and it started going for real. And finally, you know how the Thai guys will just get in the clinch and kick your leg until you can't stand up anymore? Then it turns into a ground and pound fight. Cam Goldner looked like he got run through a concrete mixer face first. And this was 2 weeks before I got to the company. He still looked bad when I got there. And I asked what the hell happened to the CO. He said he mouthed off to the wrong Thai. Don't talk to the Thais. You know, but I saw the camcorder video of what happened. I'm like, oh, I need to talk to some of those guys, because that's where I discovered most of the Thais were terrible with a pistol. So I was trading pistol range time for lessons with the Thais, because they knew all sorts of interesting ways to stick knives in people. They were hilarious. The problem was, if you were one of the Americans they liked, their idea of saying good morning involved kicking you upside the head, which goes back to that whole head kicks is a disrespect thing. They were so fast it didn't matter. It was just
You
and
can't
they're like, too slow, Daniel.
You can't mess with those ties. You cannot mess with them. That Muay Thai to me is the ultimate form of striking.
It is,
because
it's you better learn it when you're really young, because it's something I just don't think most white people are wired to do.
I mean, I tried it, so I was like, okay, because I had seen like people getting kicked in the leg before, and I'm like, that's nothing, right? And then I got kicked once, and I'm like, okay, what's the big deal? Then he kicked me again. I'm like, okay, I feel it a little bit, and he kicked me a third time, and then I could barely stand up after that. It was just 3 times.
In the same spot, though.
It was the same spot in that little the nerve right there on the side.
They're aiming for the nerve junctions, or aiming for the major muscle groups.
That distal third of your outer quadriceps, right above your knee. About the third third time, you get that ridge of their tibia on there, and feel like
it was terrible. Anymore. And I'm like, okay, now I understand. And it wasn't even full power. It was just like he was just doing it, and it was like, okay, now I understand.
Yeah, and one of them, I think it was Sergeant First Class Sathaporn, had won the Thai equivalent of the All Armies 3 years in a row. He was the one who jacked up Captain Golder. Yeah, he picked he talked to the wrong Thai. I'm telling you, that did not end well.
Yeah.
Well,
their
The nerve
elbows and their
deadening.
knees.
Yep,
Clinch.
elbows, knees, and
Uh-huh.
shins, man.
Uh-huh.
They're so strong in the clinch too. It's crazy. You can't move them. It's like,
Yeah. I mean, I was twice this guy's size and getting my
Yeah.
ass kicked. It was educational, don't get me wrong, but it still hurt.
I will say that having done any training in martial arts is definitely a way to stay humble, because you quickly learn, no matter how quick a gunslinger you are, there's always someone faster.
Mm-hmm. I will freely admit the worst beating I took in my entire life was from an 83-year-old Japanese man.
whoa.
It was over so fast, I literally do not know what he did. I had to go back and watch the video like 3 times. Mid-South Aikido Symposium 1993 or early 94. He asked for the 5 largest men in the room. I was one of them. Sensei Bader shoves me in the small of the back, puts me out there on the floor with them. He bows, we all exchange bows and everything. He says, you can come all at once or you can come one at a time. The camera will catch it all. I wake up looking at the lights a couple of minutes later. He like popped a couple of nerve junctions or something. I'm like, That was it. I never felt a thing. I never saw it coming. Keep me humble, though.
Yeah, and the good thing is if you can take that and translate it into the books, the fiction, so that way you can let everyone, your pain becomes everyone's pain.
I figured I couldn't describe the nerve junctions, so instead I just hit the guy with a chair.
That worked. So the movie that I was referencing earlier that the Steven Seagal peaked in my head was this Secondhand Lions, about the 2 older gentlemen that were former French legionnaires that retired, and then they're raising their kid, and some punk kids sort of fight with them in the bar thinking it's we're just going to beat up these old dudes, and it ends badly for them.
Yes.
So it reminds me of that expression my high school English teacher said, just because there's snow on the roof doesn't mean there's not a fire in the furnace. That scene sort of encapsulates that one when it comes to fighting for me. But when it gets to the fiction, the hand-to-hand combat in fiction, are there any tropes you guys specifically like to see?
Like to see.
I like the experience one because it's true. I mean, we just talked about that with like you got to be. So old men excel at treachery. Jim Butcher said in his book there are old swordsmen and bold swordsmen, but there are very few old bold swordsmen, and it's very true. The people that made it that long in a profession where men are supposed to die young are terrifying.
Yes.
And I like seeing that trope because those are the men that taught me. I had learned from men that had been fighting from Vietnam into the 70s and 80s. And they had amazing experiences. And I'm not a veteran. I'm not anything like that. I've never been in war or anything like that, but I can tell you I know how to fight because I learned from the men that were. And that's why I know my things work, is when I finally did have to use them, they worked. They came from men that survived the real thing. And that was really important. And it's cool to see that come across in the fiction. There's lots of cool little things that you can learn. I brought up head kicks earlier. It was Way of the Shadows, Brent Weeks. Master Durzo said, if you respect your opponent, never throw a kick above the knee. And don't get me wrong, if you've been doing, Taekwondo your entire life or Muay Thai your entire life, that might change. But for the vast majority of people, that is 100% a true statement. And so things like that when they come out in real life, it's awesome.
Yeah, it's a good way to get your leg trapped and get punched in the crotch.
Yeah. Or thrown on your head.
That too.
I really
so what about you, Reggie? Are there any tropes you specifically like to see?
You have to come back to me because I got so much stuff going through my head right now. I'm really trying to focus on
all right, Doc. You've been relatively quiet tonight.
I've seen things many times in books that have expressed that is a trope that I probably like it because I agree with it. Conditioning over technique when it comes to winning a fight.
Yes.
there's just, there's, in a real world example, a guy who is a conditioned, consistently training boxer, when it comes to using your hands, I don't care if you're, an Asian martial artist and an external style, and you spend so much time, using your hands and your feet. When it comes to like a game where it's just a guy using his hands, it is really rare for somebody to get a leg up on that boxer, so to speak, because that discipline and the way those dudes condition themselves and, the training they do, I mean, they're fit to fight, and, coming from that background, and I'm not talking, but like traditional martial arts and spending hour after hour after hour, practicing forms and, and things like that. It's you're studying a martial art. You're not studying fighting per se. And when I see those kind of tropes reinforced, like I say, I like that because I agree with it.
Yeah.
Okay. You ready yet, Reggie?
Yeah, definitely 100% the underdog. When the underdog wins, I like that. One, because I like to see that in real life. 99% of the time when I'm watching a fight, I'm always rooting for the underdog. I don't know why, but a lot of other people root for the underdog as well. So if I'm reading something and I see that the underdog or someone that's underestimated, he ends up winning.
Yeah, I think the underdog story is popular as in the West is almost biblical. The whole David and Goliath thing. You go back to that, and I think even that story resonates because you want to almost self-insert, like, he might be bigger and stronger, blah blah blah, but I could still kick his butt.
Yeah,
it's the power fantasy.
Yep. Yeah. And then in real fighting too, because I always say this, like when I'm fighting, when I'm boxing, I love to see people with the big muscles that look like bodybuilders because those are the easiest people to beat because they get tired really fast. They're very slow and you can just see their punches coming from a mile away. But 99% of the population that doesn't train will look at like someone that's huge and that's a bodybuilder and like, oh, you don't want to mess with that guy. But everyone that trains knows that the more muscles that you have, the worse fighter as far as sports or like getting in the ring, the worse fighter you're going to be.
Unless you happen to be like Brock Lesnar or somebody.
Oh yeah, like a freak of nature. Then yeah.
Yeah, well, Brock's the big man that can move. He also ran bleachers with a 90-pound log on his back, for regular training. So
yeah, but once he fought Overeem, who was like an actual like real, he got beat real bad.
Yeah, he was also in the physical decline by then with his internal
diverticulitis.
But yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right. He did have a stomach issue.
Oh yeah, he got cut open and put back together, and I don't think he ever came back from that.
That's probably what happened then.
So one of the things I like to see with the trope is the understanding that anyone who's ever done contact anything, the way it is in practice and the way it is in the field, be it the tournament or whatever, don't always line up. And I've seen several times where like somebody gets in a street fight, like, wait a minute, that's against the rules. Like, bitch, who said we had rules right now?
Exactly.
And so I like seeing the reality of like street fighting meeting the very structured rule set of a arena, and when those two clash, it's always an entertaining thing to see, be either on the screen in real life or on the printed page.
Summer and fall of 2003, we were doing a lot of building raids, and we were getting in close quarters with a lot of guys who thought they knew how to fight. I had one Iraqi come in for an upper body clinch one time, and I just fell back into high school wrestling team habits and lateral dropped him on a concrete floor, which was funnier because I was in full combat gear at the time. It had plates and everything else. So I was 245, benched about 400 at the time. And then I've got an extra, 60 pounds of gear when I'm rolling through and coming down and, landing on this guy. And my platoon sergeant starts screaming at me because he thought I killed him. And
but I want you to know
he'll be okay. He's still breathing. He'll get up in a minute. We flex cuffed him. Yeah, a couple of cracked ribs, flex cuffed, got him out of there. Another guy wanted to duck in and try shoving his, I guess he was going for a double leg takedown. So my high school had this signature duck under variation that had been invented by a guy several years before me who had 3 state titles in a row. So I hit him with that one, which pretty much dumped him on the back of his head on a concrete floor. And after that, they told me, Kemp, stop fighting people. You're going to kill somebody. Worse, though, later on in the year, and I swear to God, I hate telling war stories except when they're applicable. I had an Iraqi who was daring me to shoot him. And he's just standing there yelling at me. You can't shoot somebody a little. You can cut somebody a little. Yeah. And I had a good-sized knife worn cross draw on my gear. And I'm visualizing this spot between like his second and third shirt buttons. Right in that chest cartilage, right on that sternum cartilage where I'm not going to get any serious damage, but it's going to hurt. So I'm just aiming at that one spot, thinking. My squad leader's looking the other way. Out comes the knife. I popped him straight fencing lunge. Yes, I was on the fencing team too. Popped him center chest right on that spot. Back in, re-scabbarded it real quick. And he looks down, and there's this little hole in his shirt. It hasn't even started bleeding yet. And he looks, and there's this little bit of blood around the hole. And he looks over. This guy had gone from cussing me, cussing my mom, daring me to shoot him. He looks down because what the facility we were guarding had already closed for the day. He looks down at that bloody hole, looks back up at me, says, "I am very sorry, Corporal Kemp. I will come back tomorrow." And off he walked. And tomorrow it was going to be second squad's problem, so I never heard anything more about this. But I'm like, okay, cool. You can't shoot somebody a little, but you can cut them a little.
That's true.
Or you can punch them a little, or only partly dislocate a joint. There's this whole continuity of force thing, where you get out of competition and into the real world. And then there's so many more interesting ways to cheat. Because competitive wrestling, hey, cool. I can't just grab a handful down there and lift you. You can in a street fight, and that makes everybody real polite real quick. Everybody's totally willing to talk shit until you've got a handful of something, and then they get really polite really fast.
When we were given the winning the hearts and mind speech, my platoon sergeant reminded us that if you grab them by the balls, the heart and mind will follow.
Literally true, and I can prove it.
Everything follows.
Yes. And just so you know, the VA has determined that was not service connected, Dan. Are there any closing thoughts you have? We're definitely going to have to revisit this topic more drilled down with a more narrow focus, because I think there's a lot here we can cover. But any closing thoughts from you, gentlemen, before we tell them how they can stalk you on the internets?
I had a couple things I wanted to throw out. If you haven't seen the Undisputed movies, and I know that shocks most people when I say movies. So the first one's a prison boxing film, and it has A-list actors. Yep. There were actually 3 more after that, and they become MMA films, and they're fantastic. If you like action, if you like fights, is it realistic 100%? Absolutely not. But it's got Michael Jai White and Scott Adkins, who for me are 2 of the best on-screen martial artists that are doing anything right now, or were doing anything, a few years ago. The other thing I want to throw out is that when we talk about a fight, everybody likes to say there's no rules, but I actually think there's 3. And there's gentlemen on this podcast that have a lot more fighting experience than me, so I think that they will be able to, validate that. The first one is come mentally prepared. The second one is come physically prepared. And the third one is know the rules or lack thereof. And that's it. That's all
I will agree with all 3 of those.
Yeah. Those are the rules of any fight ever.
Okay.
I can't argue with any of the 3 of those.
I would agree with points 2 and 3, only because most people, I feel like, aren't mentally prepared, especially when they're super drunk and start to fight. So I
They
would agree
think they're mentally
They think
prepared.
they're mentally prepared, and then they
No.
get their ass whooped.
Okay, I can. I'll grant you that.
I'm just saying, sometimes the bottle of tequila will lie to you.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's called
It
liquid
will,
courage.
it will tell you can win fights you had no business getting in.
Yeah.
So, any closing thoughts from you, Doc?
Write it in a way that it entertains you, because if it doesn't, it's not going to entertain anybody else.
That's right up there with don't preach harder than you entertain when it comes to any topic. All right. Dan and Reggie, any closing thoughts?
I like fighting because it's the only thing that you can do where you have to think in chaos. You have to be able to react properly in a chaotic environment. And I think that transfers well to writing, because sometimes, or a lot of times, when you're in a fight, you kind of know what to do after you start fighting. And then it's kind of like writing, where you have to start writing first. And then as you're writing, things just kind of start to fall into place. So I just kind of compare the two as far as fighting and writing goes.
I like writing fight scenes partly because it makes my publisher shut up and stop complaining that I need more action sequences to break up the plot. Because I write long, complicated plots and very logistically, a lot of drilling down on the logistics and the planning side to make the climax of the story believable. You have to figure out how you're getting to that point in the story and sell it. But he's like, too much talking. I need more violence over here. I'm like, okay, I will invent some unrealistic violence in the plot just to shut you up, John.
Okay. Well,
the publisher's always right.
One of the things that I liked, and is advice my wrestling coach gave me in high school, is if you can walk out in the middle of a crowded auditorium wearing nothing but spandex singlet, you can take on the world. Because
I like that.
It definitely, you it's nothing between you and the world, but your pride and your skill. And that's one of the reasons I liked the martial arts. When I joked about doing the karate as a kid, but I actually took judo on the Navy base through the MWR growing up. And then, I wrestled it, and rugby's basically wrestling around a sport with a ball. And so one of the things I liked about that is they're all team sports, but it's still just you and somebody else. There's no hiding behind it. It wasn't my fault. If you win or you lose, it's all you.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, there's still the team building aspect, but when it comes down to it, there are no excuses. And that's one of the things I do personally, is I like to challenge myself to things where there's no excuse to hide behind, because it's too easy to get complacent. Like, oh, if he had just blocked better, or he had just run faster. There's none of that in a fight. Like it's you won or you didn't, and it's all you. And that's what makes it beautiful, I think. And it's why we've done it since the ancient Greeks onward. There's just something about that one-on-one conflict where you test yourself against both yourself and your opponent. So, all right. Well, this is the part of the interview, dear listener, where I remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right books, and that's especially important with the indie productions out there. They do not have huge, monolithic mega corporations behind them, so your reviews do help tweak the algorithms and, tantalize and tease the readers who might be thinking about those books. So with that, please do that. It really does matter. Reggie, where can we find you, and what are you working on now?
Right now, I am working on. It's a book that it's a nonfiction book. So I've been writing my fiction books, and then out of nowhere, God told me that I need to write a nonfiction book that explores the similarities between boxing and Christianity. So I tried to put it off, but I feel like he just kept reminding me to do it. So I've dropped everything, and I'm doing that. It was just an unexpected thing that literally happened like a couple months ago. So I'm doing that. I don't know the title yet, but it's first draft is written right now. I'm editing everything, going through first round edits. You could find me at Fist of Fiction on Twitter. And yeah, that's I pick up my book, the first book of the Guardian saga, The Guardian of the Ward.
All right, Jesse, what are you writing at the moment? And then how can we find you on the wild interwebs?
I am working on my first full-length novel, which is basically the story of a Green Beret necromancer. Is the shortest way I can put that, and how that ties into the bigger world that we have going on. I'm also editing an anthology, working on that right now. As far as where to find me, you can find me at outlawauthor.com. That will take you to everything else. You're probably not going to want to hang out there long. I got a little bit of cool artwork and where you can find the books. But you can find me on Substack, Twitter, all of those good places, everywhere except Facebook. Facebook's my personal page. If you show up, you're more than welcome, but you're going to get personal me, not professional me, and they are different. Other than that, yeah.
If the Green Beret is a necromancer, does the Snake Eater revive it and then eat it again?
That remains to be seen. I guess people just have to read the novel and find out.
That's a perfect answer. All right, Dan, what are you working on now, and then how can we stalk you on the internet?
All right, tonight I am finishing edits on an alternate military history story in the Spanish-American War that I promised, that I told James Young I would have those final edits tonight. Then I'm going to spend the rest of the weekend trying to get another 5,000 to 10,000 words done on Athenaeum Part 3 that I've got to get turned in very shortly. Then after that, it's going to be short stories and whatever the voices in my head tell me to do while I start trying to organize Athenaeum Part 4 because people keep buying them.
That's a good problem to have. All right, last but
it
certainly
is.
not least, Doc, what are you writing at the moment? You're probably on like your billionth book, like you're a machine.
That's very kind. I've gone. I'm way off the schedule here. I've owed my editor a new Dark Operator book for about like 6 months now. But the being a cog in the military-industrial complex and keeping our warfighters going has taken up more of my time than than I have had in previous years where I've been knocking the books out. So I promise I'll get this Dark Operator done and the next Warlord done here in the next, I'll give myself an arbitrary deadline, 6 months, and get those out. But I'm off next week to another Army base with another group of snipers to be trained, and that's told my fans to please understand that I just got to be contributing to the effort for our warfighters right now. But I'll get back to knocking the books out.
If you get near Campbell, say hi, Doc.
Oh yeah,
I actually drive. I drive by quite a lot. Yeah, and same thing. I'm up in Spokane at least a couple of times a year, so I will reach out to everybody. Promise.
Yeah, hit me up.
So I know this is going to be sacrilegious to the Galaxy's Edge fans because everyone loves your Dark Operator, but I liked your Warlord books better. I don't know. They hit right for me.
That's very kind. I got a small following on that, and I'm currently letting everybody down. so I mean, I will get back on it.
Writing through a TBI, I'm slow already, so I will judge no one for the speed of their production. All right,
Martin. We judge Martin.
Except for Jar Jar Martin.
Yes.
But I think Larry Correa already covered all that needed to be said about that one, and I'm just going to move on. So with that, you can find us, dear listener, on our link tree at linktr.ee, linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast, where we link to all the things, the bit shoots, the rumbles, the YouTubes, the TikToks, maybe the Twitter, the Spotify, our Blasters and Blades Facebook group and Facebook page. We have our email, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com for professional purposes only. Save the shenanigans from Adam Stabby Stab over there on the Instagram, the Twitter, and the email. You can support the show over at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that is for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will snort that coffee brand coffee till their head explodes, people, and we will film it for your enjoyment. Use the code podcast grunts. Link is in the show notes. You get 10% off. We get a little bit of a kickback. It's a win-win, and you're shopping local. So if you're in the continental United States, that's a big deal. I like shopping local, supporting local businesses, but I'm not allowed to get on that soapbox. They took it away from me. So instead, I'll say thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades Podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. All right. Thank you all for coming on. We're definitely going to have to revisit this with a more narrow focus. It's a lot of fun. I appreciate each and every one of you coming on and all of you listening at home as well. And with that, we're going to hit the end button. Wait for it.